To an animal lover, venturing into the world of zookeeping might seem like a dream come true. However, these magnificent animals, despite being in the zoo, remain wild at heart, and their unpredictability has led to several fatal attacks and maulings. Despite the rigorous safety protocols and extensive training, the bond formed between keepers and the animals can sometimes blur the line between trust and peril. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. In today's episode, we go over 3 of the most terrifying times a zookeeper was fatally mauled by an animal in the zoo. Welcome to Final Affliction. Working with animals is always a dangerous job to do. Even the most seemingly harmless animal, such as a dog, could turn around and bite their trainer should they feel threatened or in danger. With how difficult it is to get away from an enraged animal, it is even more difficult to swim away from one, something that Kelty Brine discovered the hard way. We have all probably heard of Sealand, an American theme park in Canada. The park is home to a variety of different marine mammals, including orcas, sea lions, and dolphins, to name a few. All of these animals are expected to put on shows for crowds of people multiple times a day and have personal trainers who teach them all of the tricks they need to know. There has been much controversy over Sealand throughout the years, but the most controversial topic of all centered around one of the park's killer whales, a male called Tilikum. Tilikum had originally lived in the wild with his pod. However, when he was just 2 years old, he was ripped away from his pod off the coast of Iceland. He was transferred to a holding tank at a marine zoo in Iceland, where he spent almost a year caged in a tiny concrete tank. The tank was so small that all Tilikum could do was swim in circles or float still on the surface of the water. The life that he suddenly found himself in was nothing like the one that he had been living in the ocean, with wide open spaces and a family around him. Eventually, in 1984, the whale was transferred to the rundown Sealand of the Pacific, a marine theme park on Vancouver Island. It was here that the young male met 2 older female orcas called Haida 1 and Nootka 4. He was housed with these other whales. However, it wasn't a pleasant stay. In the wild, female orcas are at the top of the social structure in a pod, so with 2 in the same tank, they were always fighting for dominance. This led to Tilikum being attacked by the females whilst held in a tiny 26-foot wide metal pool for 14 hours a day. Things got so bad for the young male that he was eventually separated from the females and put in a medical pool. It turned out that he had developed stomach ulcers from the stress of living with the females. Despite the controversy surrounding the male whale, he was actually described as youthful, energetic, and eager to learn by trainers at the park. One man who worked at the park in the 80s, a biologist called Eric Walters, said that Tilikum was the trainer's favorite. He was the one they all really liked to work with. But that didn't mean much to the whales themselves. Due to behavioral issues with the female orcas, a head trainer from SeaWorld was brought in to help make improvements to the aquarium. The man, Bruce Stevens, is said to have given each trainer a handbook, which warned, if you fail to provide your animals with the excitement they need, you may be certain they will create the excitement themselves. Eric was thrilled at this development, as he thought that it meant that the whales would get better living conditions and would be treated better, but he was sadly mistaken. The biologist once compared Sealand to McDonald's, saying that it was not good for an intelligent animal to simply do the same thing day after day. It wasn't long until Bruce's warning about animals entertaining themselves became true. The orcas had become so bored and angry at their situations that they began attacking anything that got into the water. In May 1989, Eric Walters quit his job at Sealand and wrote a scathing letter to the Canadian Federation of Humane Societies, highlighting the safety concerns he had about the aquarium. He ended his letter with a chilling warning, claiming that sooner or later, someone was going to get seriously hurt. And on February 20th, 1991, his warnings became a reality. It had started off as a relatively normal day at the theme park. Visitors were enjoying seeing all of the different kinds of animals that the park had to offer, and trainers were busy putting on shows with the animals. One of these trainers was a young 20-year-old woman called Kelty Byrne. At the time, she was studying biology at her local university and acted as a part-time trainer. She loved the animals at the park and enjoyed teaching them new tricks to impress the guests. On this particular day in February, Kelty had been training with Tilikum and the female whales. She had finished her shift and was getting ready to leave the poolside when, as she walked along the edge of the water, she slipped over. This simple fall would then lead to one of the most traumatic experiences anyone could have witnessed at the park. As she slipped over, one of Kelty's feet fell into the Orca pool. The young trainer had just finished up with a show, so the aquarium was still packed with visitors, all of which then witnessed Tilikum grab the woman's foot and drag her into the pool. Seeing the incident, the other trainers at the poolside immediately rushed to try and help Kelty. They all knew what Tilikum and the females were like, and they couldn't help but feel like something terrible was going to happen. And they were right. Guests watched in horror as Tilikum dragged Kelty around the pool, whilst the other whales, Haida and Nootka, worked together to keep the other trainers from helping the woman escape. Throughout all of this, Kelty constantly screamed for help. She exclaimed that she didn't want to die and thrashed with all of her might to try and escape from Tilikum's hold on her. However, each time she managed to get away from the whale, all three of the orcas would work together to pull her back again. Terrified, Kelty could do nothing but scream as she was dragged around the pool. Whilst it was a senseless and horrific attack to everyone witnessing the event, it was simply a play session to the whales. The other trainers tried their hardest to get to the panicking woman. They threw a life ring into the water for her to grab so that they could pull her back to the side of the pool. They even tried scaring and tempting the orcas away from Kelty by throwing fish at them and banging on buckets, but nothing worked. In one moment, Kelty emerged from the water in Tilikum's jaws screaming for help, and in the next, she was silent. The impact of being dragged around in the water by a 22.5-foot-long, 12,500-pound whale had taken its toll on her. The fact that Tilikum was the largest orca in captivity had not helped her chances of escaping her fate. Even though Kelty had drowned, it still took another 2 hours for the trainers to get the orcas to release the young woman's body. By that time, the whales had stripped and bit Kelty multiple times. At the time, Sealand's manager claimed the attack was unexpected and simply a tragic accident. However, the director of Orca Lab, Paul Spong, believed that it was inevitable due to how the animals had been treated. He stated that by keeping the whales in a small steel tank, they had suffered from an extreme level of sensory deprivation. This, in turn, effectively led to the animals becoming psychotic. After the attack, Sealand was closed, but this wasn't the end of the attacks. Tilikum was sold to SeaWorld in Orlando. During this time, the documentary Black Fin was being made. Trainers told the documentary that they were unaware of the whale's past, something which led to another tragedy. On the morning of July 6, 1999, SeaWorld trainer Michael Dougherty glanced in the underwater viewing area by his office and saw Tilikum looking back with 2 human feet hanging down his side. The victim was a man called Daniel Dukes, who had evaded security to stay at the park overnight. It seemed he wanted to take a moonlight swim with Tilikum, unaware that the orca had no intention of being friendly. Once the body was recovered, it was easy to see that he was covered in cuts and had puncture wounds to his head, body, and left leg. Shockingly, this attack still didn't stop SeaWorld from using Tilikum in their shows, which inevitably led to the death of one of the park's most experienced trainers, Dawn Brancheau. The attack happened in 2010 at the Dine with Shamu show. Dawn was hosting a petting session when Tilikum grabbed her long ponytail in his mouth and dragged her into the pool. Dawn tried to pull her hair free, but she was no match for Tilikum's massive size. Her colleagues immediately initiated their emergency procedures, slapping the water in a signal to Tilikum to stop and dropping a weighted net to try and separate the whale from the woman. But Tilikum paid no attention to them. At one point, Dawn managed to break free from the whale's grip and swam to the surface of the water, but Tilikum was not going to let her get away. The male orca slammed into Dawn, clamping his jaws around her torso, and began shaking her violently. Even when trainers were able to get Tilikum onto the medical lift and out of the water, he still refused to let Dawn go. Her colleagues were then forced to pry the orca's jaws open to pull her body out. She had been scalped and dismembered and had almost every bone in her body broken before being drowned. The incident was put down as a training accident, but others have speculated that Tilikum knew exactly what he was doing. Amazingly, Tilikum was kept at SeaWorld even after taking the lives of 3 people, where he continued to perform until 2017, when he passed away from a bacterial infection at age 35. While SeaWorld did face public backlash and a decline in attendance after the death of trainer Dawn Brancheau, it was not shut down entirely. Instead, the company announced several changes in its approach, including phasing out its breeding program for killer whales and transitioning to more educational and conservation-focused exhibits. Despite these changes, SeaWorld still performs with killer whales to this very day, leaving many people to believe it's only a matter of time before another whale attacks and brings another trainer to their terrifying final affliction. Safari parks are a place of refuge from the hustle and bustle of modern life, where one can reconnect with nature and experience the wonder of the great outdoors. The safeguarding of national parks thrives only through the devoted efforts of park rangers, who are their caretakers. However, in their noble endeavors, these park rangers often find themselves amidst captivating encounters with diverse wildlife. But unfortunately, encounters with formidable creatures like bears sometimes pose unforeseen challenges. Kiyomi Sato was a park ranger at the Gunma Safari Park, located northwest of Tokyo in Japan. The park offers a safari zone where visitors can drive freely around the park or in designated buses to view and feed animals in their natural habitats. It houses over 100 species of different animals that roam freely in the extensive 360,000 square meter grounds. The enchanting oasis beckons visitors with promises of untamed beauty and the opportunity to witness wildlife in its purest form as it unfolds just beyond a single pane of window glass. However, on the ill-fated day of Tuesday, the 16th of August, 2016, the park would bear witness to a sequence of events that defied the harmony it was renowned for. It was a day like any other, with the radiant sun casting its golden hues upon the tranquil scenery and the gentle rustling of leaves embracing the air. Within the park's borders, 46-year-old Kiyomi Sato got into her vehicle and embarked on her routine patrol, unaware of the invisible threads of destiny that were about to be woven. The car was her trusted companion and her gateway to the uncharted territories within the realm of wild predators. With practiced grace, she navigated the winding roads of the park, her eyes keenly scanning each corner, every patch of lush greenery where curious creatures might lay in wait. The melodies of chirping birds and rustling leaves provided a soundtrack to her journey. A gentle breeze swept through the open windows, carrying with it the subtle sense of grass and adventure as the unmistakable silhouette of majestic giraffes emerged from the verdant landscape. The giraffes gracefully glided across the savanna with their elongated necks stretched towards the heavens, and their patterned hides blending harmoniously with the golden hues of the surrounding flora. Kiyomi eased her foot off the gas pedal, bringing the car to a gentle halt. With her hands resting on the steering wheel, she surrendered to the captivating scenery that was unfolding before her eyes. Time seemed to stand still as she embraced this precious moment of connection with the natural world. Unfortunately, it was amidst this beauty that disaster struck. An Asian black bear, which had been silently observing her parked car, launched its unsuspected assault. Driven by an unyielding hunger for life, the bear stood on its hind legs, reached out with its paws, and delicately grasped the safety bar on the passenger window of the car and began pulling. The bear's raw strength manifested in every tendon as it pulled the safety bar with purpose. The metal groaned under the force as the safety bars swiftly relinquished their grip and yielded to the bear's unwavering will. The safety bars, meant to ensure the safety of those inside the vehicle, had now been ripped off the frame of the car's window, exposing the park ranger to vulnerability. Kiyomi, who was stunned and frozen in fear, turned just as the bear had climbed into the passenger seat. Her senses were enveloped in a whirlwind of panic. Her heart pounded through her veins. Her eyes, wide with terror, desperately sought solace in the face of imminent peril. She found herself at the mercy of this unexpected intruder and had neither the time to get out of the vehicle and run as the hungry beast began its assault. Her fate was sealed. The safe haven of the vehicle, meant to shield her from harm, was now an arena of terror as the bear unleashed its aggression upon its human prey. In a blur of fur and fangs, Kiyomi found herself ensnared within the bear's grip. Pain seared through every fiber of her being as the bear's fangs tore through the flesh on her left breast and stomach. The world around her faded into a haze of fear, desperation, and confusion. The baffling sight drew gasps of astonishment and concern from nearby park visitors who were unaware of the horrors unfolding inside the confined space of the car. The car shook violently as the bear forcefully maneuvered its jaws, trying to tear the flesh from the bone. Fur and blood danced through the air, adding horror to the inconceivable sight. Swiftly recognizing the severity of the situation, fellow park staff rushed to Kiyomi's aid and shot the menacing beast before it could inflict further damage. They provided immediate medical attention while frantically summoning the necessary emergency services. Kiyomi's life now hung by a thread as she was urgently transported to the nearest hospital, where medical professionals tirelessly battled to save her. Unfortunately, the news that would send shockwaves throughout the park and the wider community soon arrived. A life had been extinguished prematurely, leaving an indelible void in the hearts of all who knew and loved Kiyomi Sato. In the wake of this devastating incident, authorities sought to decipher the sequence of events that led to this tragic encounter. It was discovered that Kiyomi had taken her routine patrol with the passenger's window rolled down. Typically, even though there are safety bars across the middle of each window, they should stay up unless the ranger is feeding the animals. The safety bars are designed to allow only the mouth of a bear to pass. However, this particular bear had successfully managed to tear out the safety bar, and with the window rolled down, the beast had seized its opportunity, laying claim to a life lost in the pursuit of duty. The authorities also questioned the strength of the 2-centimeter in diameter safety bars on the vehicle's windows, and why there was only one safety bar put in place instead of the recommended 2. But the park officials stated that the decision to use one bar was a point of compromise between safety and convenience. Eventually, 2 safety bars were installed on each window, since it was now clear that one was not enough for protection. Although the use of wire mesh as an additional safety feature was discussed, it was later discarded as it would not allow the park workers to feed the animals through the window and would also make visibility poor. As the community mourned the loss of a cherished member, they also found solace in the shared memories and experiences that Kiyomi Sato had gifted them during her time at the park. Her unwavering dedication and her passion for the well-being of the animals she cared for will be remembered by everyone who knew and worked with her. A renewed commitment to education and awareness regarding wildlife conservation also took root, driven by the desire to honor Kiyomi's memory and prevent further loss of life. The Asian black bear was identified as a 5-year-old male, weighing a staggering 160 kilograms. Kiyomi's deadly encounter was the second animal attack in Gunma Safari Park since 1997, when a tiger killed a couple after they misguidedly exited their vehicle in the tiger enclosure. Now, with 2 human fatalities under the park's watch, visitors are always thinking if they will be the next to meet their terrifying final affliction. Huntingdonshire, England is the last place that you'd think of to find exotic animals like cheetahs, tigers, monkeys, and raccoons. But Hamerton Zoo Park's been operational since 1990. When Rosa King first showed an interest in the animal kingdom when she was a little girl, this was the closest place her mother could find to satiate the girl's hunger for knowledge. And that was the start of a budding career for Rosa. Every holiday, she'd beg her mother to take her back. And when she got older, Rosa would save up her allowance and take the train to Huntingtonshire to stare through the glass enclosures and walk by the fenced housing a dozen times in a single day. Predictably, Rosa studied zoology, and by the time she was hired as a zookeeper at Hamerton Zoo Park, the staff already knew her by name. It didn't even feel like starting a new job. Rosa just slipped in, like she was part of the family already. And that's where she worked for the next 13 years, while she continued to rack up the degrees and diplomas in her field in her spare time. In 2014, Rosa spent 2 years redesigning the larger animals' enclosures. She spearheaded the project, her heart set on making the animals' living spaces as large and interactive as the grounds could possibly hold, and to engineer a system that was as safe as it could possibly be made for the human handlers that cared for the sometimes ferocious creatures that they loved so much. Rosa's ingenuity created a smart system of gates that allowed animals to eat in a separate enclosure built into their cages. When the gate closed behind the animal, who was happily gobbling down a meal, zookeepers could safely enter the cage to clean, maintain, and drop off toys and other odds and ends needed for that particular day. Rosa's new system was so effective that it has since been adopted by almost every zoo and park meant for viewing across the globe. In May of 2017, 2 years after the zoo's new cage system was implemented, Rosa and the team received a litter of African serval cat kittens. The rescue litter required round-the-clock care, and Rosa was putting in nights to ensure that the kittens were fed and cared for until they became old enough to be released into their new home. Rosa and 2 of her colleagues started at 9 in the evening after closing time and the evening rounds were done. They kept the kittens under observation, feeding them every 2 hours, and at 6 the next morning, they'd start the morning rounds before opening time. When the morning staff arrived to open for the day, whoever was on call that night would finally be relieved, and they'd go home to get some rest, only to do it all over again that evening. On the 19th of March, Rosa handed off the new babies off to the vet, and she and her 2 colleagues, Jeffrey and David, set out to feed and do a quick cleanup before the rest arrived to relieve them. Jeff and David went ahead, leading the big cats into their top-notch feeding booths, while Rosa came from the rear to clean out the water troughs. Jeff deposited chunks of steak into Sissip, the Malaysian tiger's food tray, kicking the latch door closed behind him as the tiger entered its safe holding. But Jeff's eyes were not on the door, and he only heard the telltale metallic clang behind him and assumed that it snapped shut, like it always did. But that latch never truly snapped closed. The gate just swung back lazily as the tiger inside was still preoccupied with its food, standing wide open as he left and locked the main gate behind him. 15 minutes after Jeff left, and Sissip had devoured every last scrap in his bowl, the tiger turned back through the open door behind him and went back to lying behind a low wall to laze away his full belly. That's when he heard the squeak of the main gate open. It was Rosa, carrying a bucket full of soapy water, some sponges, and a handheld broom. Fully expecting Sissip to be locked safely away with its food to occupy him, she went about cleaning the viewing window from the inside so that the visitors could get a crystal clear look inside the holding when they started to arrive in the next hour. At first, the creature was a little startled and mostly curious. He was never allowed to be in such close proximity to the living humans that came and went. He simply watched the 33-year-old slowly inching closer to her turned back. It took only minutes for him to go from curious onlooker to full-on stalker. Sissip was every bit a hunter. Life in captivity couldn't change that ingrained natural instinct. He smelled Rosa's heat, her blood, her life. Even if his stomach was full, he couldn't pass up what could be the only opportunity he'd ever get to hunt like his kind were born to do. He crept closer slowly until he was only 7 feet away from the woman, with his chest almost level to the ground, ready to pounce any moment. Rosa, still oblivious to the salivating creature behind her, caught something that made her blood run cold. In her peripheral vision, she happened to catch the open gate. Even as her head turned to look at the gate, her feet already started moving toward the exit. She knew better than anyone that that open door meant that the tiger had long since realized that it was in the cage with her. She didn't need to look back for it to know that Sissip was behind her. But her sudden movement was all that Sissip needed to finally act. It took him just one leap to land right on top of her. Rosa folded under the beast's 200 pounds like a marionette. In one smooth motion, he pounced, landed, and sank his teeth around Rosa's neck, cutting off all chances of her ever uttering out a scream for help. The canine's teeth bore into her throat, cutting off all oxygen. The pain of those teeth tearing through her flesh was quadrupled by her lungs screaming for air and the immense pressure that pounded against her skull and twanged her ears shut. Rosa's body was pinned face down on the concrete. All she could do was to desperately claw at the ground in front of her as the tiger on top of her used its weight to keep her in place. Sissip had no plans to tear or shake her. He knew full well that he had his prey exactly where he needed. As long as he stayed in place and kept applying pressure, he'd render her unconscious in no time. But Rosa, with one final spurt of survival desperation, got her hands beneath her and she pushed with all her might. Miraculously, Sissip was taken off guard and nearly lost his grip, tearing Rosa's jugular clean out. He reared back, grabbed her again, and this time he shook her to get her off her hands and knees. With a sickening snap, Rosa's spinal cord dislodged from the base of her skull, and she died instantly before loss of blood and oxygen could render her unconscious. For the next hour, while Jeff and David finished their rounds and the main gates opened to receive the first visitors of the day, Sissip toyed with the corpse of his victim. The animal had no urgency to consume Rosa, since he'd just eaten breakfast. But like his initial stalking of her, he was driven more by curiosity and instinct than any real hunger. It wasn't until the first visitor, a retired man out for a morning stroll, looked through the viewing glass that anyone even knew that Rosa was missing. He saw a pool of blood, the overturned bucket and sponges, and a heap of bloody rags that used to be Rosa's shirt. The man immediately went out to locate a staff member, being careful not to raise the alarm to the other visitors. His thoughtful discretion is what gave the employees the opportunity to remove the early arrivals without causing a panic. When the security guard, who the man found, first saw the bloody scene, emergency services were called even before anyone attempted to enter the cage. Staff members managed to coax Sissip into his side holding before the ambulance, police, and even a helicopter arrived. But they knew, judging by Sissip's blood-stained muzzle, what the outcome would be. They found Rosa, her torso and face barely recognizable, with her left leg almost severed from her body. Both of her arms were found several feet away, tucked under a bush. The zoo closed for the week to investigate the scene, to determine whether or not Rosa's ingenious snap-lock gate system was at fault. But the authorities came to the conclusion that Rosa's design was indeed every bit as amazing as the park claimed it was. Jeffrey admitted that he was probably to blame for not checking to see if it had closed behind him. But even though it was declared an accident and he faced no charges for the tragic loss because of his negligence, he just couldn't stand staying at the park. He resigned a day before Rosa's funeral. The last time he set foot inside Hammerton Zoo was for Rosa's wake. That Hammerton and Rosa's mother insisted was the proper place for everyone to say their goodbyes. There was no other place that Rosa loved more or spent more time at, surrounded by the animals that she loved most, and the place where she would have inevitably spent the majority of her life at. They said their goodbyes one last time, with Sissip staring at the small crowd of people curiously from behind his viewing glass, waiting for another opportunity to take another person like Rosa King to their terrifying final affliction.